This video is about mass incarceration in the United States and some of the effects on the American population. Links are in the description. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment, share the video, but most of all, enjoy.
Let's have a conversation about mass incarceration, or as I call it, the new Jim Crow. In this video, we will discuss juvenile detention and why juvenile justice and juvenile detention needs reform. We will also discuss the enormous cost to taxpayers. Overcrowding leads to guards being assaulted more frequently. Mass incarceration leads to more inmates being sexually assaulted. Diseases are highly concentrated in correctional facilities. A ridiculous amount of people are in prison or jail for non-violent offenses. The United States has 25% of the world's prison population. Despite the fact that crimes across the board have been falling, incarceration rates have somehow increased. This issue affects everyone, no matter your race, your gender, or social status. This is the new Jim Crow. So to start, we have to define what exactly is mass incarceration. Mass incarceration is when you have people who committed a crime, and that crime may not be that severe, but there is an incentive to lock that person up. So the system is designed so that even for some of the smallest and some of the most innocuous, dubious, nonsensical laws and crimes, that person may still find themselves behind bars. Now, I've explained this in a previous video discussing the 1994 Violent Crime Act that was written by Joe Biden, signed by Bill Clinton, and enforced by those like Kamala Harris. And if you want to see that video, then there is a link on the screen right now for you. According to the ACLU, the United States only has 5% of the world's population, and yet almost 25% of all prisoners. And in that video about the 1994 Violent Crime Act, I discussed some of the reasons for mass incarceration. But for this video, I just want to show you the effects. And one of the most devastating effects is the effect on juvenile justice. Because after all, these are just kids. The state of South Carolina will provide a perfect example as to why we need reform within juvenile justice. You see, back in 1990, there was an advocacy group known as Protection and Advocacy for People with Disabilities. And they sued because the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice used to essentially warehouse juveniles and just stack them on top of each other. There was numerous allegations of abuse, ranging from physical abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse. And because of that lawsuit, the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice made several reforms. Now, I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote. I used to work at the Broad River Road complex for the Department of Juvenile Justice. And I can tell you that during my staff training, the trainer that I had told me of a story that involved several juvenile correctional officers who would show up to work getting ready to fight because the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice had warehoused so many juveniles to the point where assaults on staff was very common. And you had juveniles in there for things such as truancy and simple possession of marijuana, when I think we all can agree that both scenarios would probably be better handled by parents versus criminal justice. Now, you would think that after a lawsuit and reforms done by DJJ that you wouldn't have more issues. However, I had discovered this state newspaper article that was published on June 4th, 2017. And that same group who sued DJJ before is now saying that just like before, there are children being put into solitary confinement. There were so many children in that facility in February 2017 that gang activity led to a riot that involved attempted murder, sexual battery, burglary, arson, and malicious damage to property. After that event, that same group who sued DJJ in 1990 is now saying that the Department of Juvenile Justice needs to improve conditions and improve treatment of the children in DJJ custody. You have such a fundamental lack of staff at DJJ, and you've had that issue for so long to the point where sometimes skirting the essential training and training people properly isn't always ideal. And so when you have a problem with people just up and quitting the job because the work conditions are so miserable, the hours are so long, and the pay is not not exactly worth it, to the point where you're rushing to get the new officers that you just got in out there on the field and inside of units, and maybe you don't worry about the quality of those officers, you just need bodies. That this is probably one of the biggest contributing factors to why DJJ has had so many issues and even had riots before, and the last riot was in just 2016, so it wasn't that long ago. And if you can't control a campus full of juveniles and prevent them from rioting, then maybe you have some issues. As someone who has worked in a correctional facility, I can tell you from experience that nothing shows the effects of mass incarceration quite like prison riots. And what you're about to see is the aftermath of a riot in a Lee County prison in South Carolina. This happened in 2018, and I must warn you that some of the images are rather disturbing.
Y'all see how these motherfuckers got us living out here? Y'all see this shit. Y'all see this shit for yourselves, you know what I'm saying? They got these crackers got us living back here like some real life savages. It's 12:30, we ain't even eat lunch yet.
The horrible conditions of that prison is a little bit alarming to me, given the fact that we, the American people, spend so much money on these facilities and also spend so much money on keeping these people incarcerated. Let me show you what I mean by that. According to the Law Dictionary, you're talking about anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 per year per inmate on average, and it doesn't matter if it's federal or state prison, the numbers are still staggering. So let's do a little bit of math here. They say that according to the U.S. Bureau of Prisons, the average cost of incarceration in 2010 for federal inmates was $28,284. But we're going to use the Vera Institute of Justice when they gave the number of $31,286 per inmate in 2012. Now the question becomes, how many inmates are actually incarcerated? Well, according to the Sentencing Project, a group that keeps track of mass incarceration, they're saying that the United States leads the world in incarceration with 2.2 million people currently incarcerated. Now, with that said, if you were to take 2.2 million and if you were to times that by $31,286, you would come up to a number that is a whopping $68 billion and some change. $68 billion to keep people in those kinds of conditions, to have riots, and to have all the other issues that is associated with mass incarceration, and you, the American taxpayer, is footing the bill for that. And that's not the only way that prisons make you suffer for their shortcomings. Let me show you how mass incarceration can in fact harm the general public in ways that some people may not have considered. This is a part of the public health records, and it's from the U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health. And they're talking about prisons as a social determinant of hepatitis C and tuberculosis infections. Because you see, in U.S. prisons, those outbreaks are so severe, there are so many people incarcerated, and the conditions are optimal for viruses and diseases that it has proven difficult to control in a prison environment. And you might be thinking, well, these prisoners are incarcerated. Well, that's cute, because guess who's not incarcerated? The guards, the nurses, the warden, prison staff in general, they get to go home. So let's say that one of those guards gets a nasty virus from one of these prisoners and brings that home to his children. Now you've got a full-blown viral outbreak that will prove to be difficult to control. On October 15th, 2007, Joseph A. Bick wrote a book called Clinical Infectious Diseases. And if you were to see volume 45, issue 8, from pages 1047 through 1055, you would find the following abstract.
At the end of 2005, 7 million people, or 1 of every 33 American adults, were either in jail, in prison, or on parole. Compared with the general public, newly incarcerated inmates have an increased prevalence of human immunodeficiency virus infection, hepatitis B virus infection, hepatitis C virus infection, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and Mycobacterium tuberculosis infection. While incarcerated, inmates are at an increased risk for the acquisition of blood-borne pathogens, sexually transmitted diseases, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus infection, and infection with airborne organisms, such as Mycobacterium tuberculosis, influenza virus, and varicella zoster virus. While incarcerated, inmates interact with hundreds of thousands of correctional employees and millions of annual visitors. Most inmates are eventually released to interact with the general public.
One of the reasons for these viral outbreaks and diseases is sexual assault, and those numbers are rather alarming. According to Human Rights Watch, the Bureau of Justice released statistics about sexual victimization of state and federal prisoners, and they found in 2007 that 4.5% of all prisoners reported being sexually assaulted, and at that time, 1,570,861. And just based on that alone, that means that 70,000 prisoners were sexually abused. And if you were to look into the Bureau of Justice statistics from the calendar year 2018, you would find the following highlights. Correctional administrators reported 24,661 allegations of sexual victimization in 2015, nearly triple the number recorded in 2011. The increase in allegations of sexual victimization from 2011 to 2015 coincided with the release in 2012 of the National Standards to Prevent, Detect, and Respond to Prison Rape. 58% of substantiated incidents of sexual victimization in 2015 were perpetrated by inmates, while 42% were perpetrated by staff members. The number of allegations in prison increased from 6,660 in 2011 to 18,666 in 2015, and that is a rise of 180%. During the 3-year aggregated period of 2013 through 2015, there were an estimated 15,875 allegations of inmate-on-inmate sexual harassment, of which 2,426 were substantiated based on completed investigations. And it's a real shame that so many of these people are being sexually assaulted, given the fact that so many are incarcerated for non-violent offenses. So that means that a significant portion of people who are incarcerated never had a victim attached to their crime, and yet because of a victimless crime, they become a victim of sexual assault. The sexual assaults are even more egregious given the fact that crime rates have actually dropped, and yet for some odd reason, incarceration rates have only increased. In fact, the rates have increased so much that while the United States has about 5% of the world's population, we have almost a quarter of all prisoners. In conclusion, you might be asking, why did I call this the new Jim Crow? Well, Jim Crow, in my opinion, is not so much about race or skin color or ethnicity. What it comes down to is the punishment of people who are considered to be less than human. And once someone is even accused of a crime, oftentimes they are treated as if they are guilty until proven innocent. What we must remember is that in many cases, people who are behind bars have not been convicted of a crime yet, and yet they are subjected to some of the worst elements that mankind has to offer. Be it disease, be it riots, be it the cost to you, the taxpayer, or be it you who may end up behind bars one day. I think that it is time to abolish the new Jim Crow.